All right, well, we're moving on. We have one more event, and then we'll get to the coffee break. Randy, if you and the panel would like to come up here. Thank you very much, Alyssa. What an excellent way to start off the day. And feel free to take the conversations in the hallway. What an excellent way to start off the day with that conversation. I want to remind you all of some keynotes we have coming up today at lunch. We have OpenAI, Alexis Bonnell, former CIO at USAID, former CIO at Air Force Research Lab. And then the closing keynote of the day will be Jeff Graham, global health official from the US State Department. So I'll introduce our next panel in 1 second here. Okay, the next panel is on religious freedom. Religious freedom has emerged as one of the priorities of this administration's policy. Our moderator is Randy Tift. Randy is the former Chief A&A Officer. Thank you all. And again, feel free to take the networking conversations in the hallway. Randy is the former Chief A&A Officer at USAID under Trump 1 and is now a senior advisor with the Accord Network. Randy, with that, I'll turn it over to you to introduce the panel and take over, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Great. Well, I know people may need a bio break, but we're going to dive right in. We have a great panel today, and I want to build on what Mike said a moment ago, that this is a period of reflection for our community. And I think today, especially with this panel, we're all going to have a chance to reflect on something that is a very deep topic, and yet one that we may not reflect on often enough in our context as development professionals. So I'm going to introduce mainly Kent, and I will defer the introduction of David until we get into the talk. But David Trimble from the Religious Freedom Institute, president of RFI, thank you for being here. Kent, we've been working together so many years. It is such a privilege for me to have you by my side as we go into this topic. So I'm going to introduce Kent, and then Kent is going to speak for about 15 minutes to explain this topic to us. And I think then we're going to have a chance to do or to reflect on the question Victoria asked, which is there a new model being built? And what should change about that model? What are some deeper things that we now, in this period, have a chance to reflect on? So Kent Hill, we first met when Kent was the president of the Institute on Religion and Democracy, IRD, here in Washington. That institution had a great impact on the administrations of President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush in terms of strengthening their positions on human rights, religious freedom, and democracy. And then after Kent's sojourn into engaging U.S. government policy, he went off to be a college president for several years. And I think, Kent, you thought you might just stay there for the rest of your life, going back to your roots, having been a professor at the University of Washington in history. But you were not fortunate. You were called back. And many of you in this room may have met Kent in his next step in life, which was the U.S. Agency for International Development, where he was assistant administrator initially for the Europe and Eurasia Bureau, very much aligned with Kent's years of expertise in that part of the world. That is where I reunited with Kent when I was working for USAID as a democracy and governance officer in Eastern Europe. So I was very happy to reunite with Kent there. And then Kent was asked to, in the second Bush term, head the Global Health Bureau. I think he actually overlapped by 1 year heading both bureaus for that 1 year period. So Kent likes to say he served 9 years in the Bush administration. And leading the Global Health Bureau with our friend Gloria Steele. They were together as the number 1 and number 2 leaders in that bureau for those 5 years. And anybody who experienced that will know that it was a very clear and strategic direction set at that time, and a lot was accomplished. Kent then had a couple years at the Templeton Foundation before heading to World Vision as Senior Vice President for International Programs, where amazingly enough, we reunited again. I was at World Vision in that period as well. And Kent then helped, in his last major career move, found the Religious Freedom Institute, along with David Trimble and Dr. Tom Farr, a well-respected retired diplomat. And the Religious Freedom Institute is one of the major thought leaders today in Washington and globally, and with educational institutions around the United States in teaching the importance of religious freedom. So I think you're in for a special opportunity today. Kent, I'm going to invite you to speak for about 15 minutes on the importance of religious freedom and its relationship to international development. Thank you, Jamie.
I haven't given a speech on these kind of topics for a few years. Been retired in West Virginia the last few years. In fact, I got up at 3:30 this morning on the outskirts of Dolly Sods. Any of you know where Dolly Sods is? Our house abuts the wilderness area, and I get up and have my morning coffee looking at Dolly Sods. And so you might ask the question, what in the world would drive me to get up at 3:30 to come here for one more speech? And I'll give you three quick reasons. The first was Gloria Steele. She's always been hard to say no to. She was the best deputy anybody could ever have. And so when Gloria asks for something, I'll do my very best to do it. The second reason was because of you. I'm very much aware and following what's been going on these last few years. I know these have been difficult times in many respects. And I just want to say this. From a vantage point looking back, seeing where you are now and what you've been through, I just have this strong affirmation that I do believe the days of bipartisan consensus on the necessary connection between foreign assistance and national interest will return. I honestly believe that there are intelligent liberals and conservatives who understand the importance of both those things, that they align, and that day will come. Now, I think we've got a problem, and it's a problem that I saw over 20 years ago starting to develop in Washington and in the culture of incredible polarization. And in times of polarization, all sorts of unintended victims will be hurt. American foreign assistance has been hurt because of the polarization. But I think the day will come when we can put that behind us and move back to something that there was broad consensus on. So hang in there. And Wade, I'm so glad SID is holding this year. I know it's tougher financially in terms of numbers. You've got to hang in there these next few years until that moment comes when there is more bipartisan consensus again. And the third reason I got up this morning was because of the topic. I was really quite surprised that SID had in an opening plenary session a discussion of religious freedom. In all my years in international development, I've seen some conferences on religious freedom. I've rarely seen an international development discussion which put front and center the importance of religious freedom. That's highly unusual. I was very impressed. And I want to tell you in the next few minutes why I think that was the right thing the organizers of this conference to do. So congrats to you guys for putting this on the agenda. And I think it's worth thinking about as we think about the future, considering why religious freedom is so important. Now, I think not only has this been neglected in the past, but as, if anything, religious freedom has been viewed as a kind of add-on. If you had room at the end of a conference or a discussion, you might talk about it. But what does this have to do with water and housing and famine relief? Why talk about religious freedom? And besides that, religion is kind of a third rail anyway, isn't it? You start to talk about religion, questions of church-state separation, and what are you doing talking about that, etc. All that misses some of the key empirical data that has emerged in recent years. And one of the greatest lessons I learned in all my years in international development, both in the government and the private sphere, was that poverty is not primarily caused by lack of water or food or housing, but by conflict and greed, by the corrosive politics of hatred and resentment, by the inability to forgive and be generous. Unless the means are found to unleash human-affirming values, the cycle of poverty and conflict simply cannot and will not be broken. If our planning neglects serious, sophisticated, well-designed programming to encourage values and to enhance the freedom of religion, one of the primary sources for the values which can build stable and peaceful societies will ultimately fail. We cannot and should not, as governments, play favorites when it comes to promoting particular religious beliefs, or even religious beliefs at all, but we can and should recognize that there is empirical evidence that religion can be and often is a powerful stimulant to the values which promote peace, foster forgiveness, and enhance civil well-being. To miss that connection is to miss one of the great successes in U.S. foreign assistance. But let's dig a little deeper into the question of why this hard-headed rationale for the emphasis on values and religion can play a role in international development. Religious freedom is important because religion is important. And what I have in mind here is this, that if you look all around the world in the societies and cultures, it is religious beliefs and values, for good or evil. Let's be honest here, they're often a problem. But they can be a major force for good around the world. And it's also clear that around the world, religion is much more important than in the Western countries at the present time. We're sort of out of step with the world in terms of viewing religion as still important in their cultures. Religion is important because human beings, by their very nature, are religious. We're not just animals with material interests for food and shelter. We ask questions about ultimate reality. And this is really important. And we're celebrating the 250th anniversary, of course, of the United States this year. And it's well to remember that our own founding father, James Madison, defined religion in this way: the duty which we owe to our Creator and the manner of discharging it. In other words, religion for most of us is not just about asking questions about ultimate reality. It's about discerning an obligation to God to live in a manner consistent with a conscience rooted in the divine. Indeed, to be faithful to God requires that one be an honorable citizen and a good neighbor. What's the connection to international development? How could it be more clear? If a genuinely religious person aligns their life to transcendent realities and God, and feels an obligation to be a good citizen, to be a good neighbor, to forgive, those are powerful forces that can unleash human flourishing. If religion prospers anywhere in the world and that kind of force is unleashed, all sorts of good can come about. And yet, religious freedom is, in 2/3 of the world, under great assault. So the power of this development tool is under siege in much of the world, the very tool that would make our programming more effective. I'm going to skip some of the justification for this from a religious standpoint and try to skip ahead to some other key points that have to do with why this is so important. There are two kinds of governments that dislike religion a lot and impede religious freedom. One of them, of course, are totalitarian or, governments that want all power. Why do they not like Jews? Why do they not like Christians? Why do they not like Muslims? Because that represents a place of authority for individuals that is higher than the state. And for a totalitarian or dictatorial regime, religion's an enemy because it represents a competing source of authority. And hence they interfere with religion. It's in our best interest in those situations to encourage religious freedom, because what will happen as a result is those governments will be limited. Any person who takes religion seriously cannot give their ultimate allegiance to the state. And that means the terrible things that can be done in the name of the state are mitigated or much more difficult to take place. Now I want to mention something that I alluded to a few moments ago, and that is that we need to recognize, of course, that religion is also a source of the problem. A lot of the conflicts in the world, some of the intolerance, much of the intolerance, is because of people who claim to be religious. And religious extremism is an equal opportunity employer. You can find Christian extremists and Jewish extremists and Muslim extremists and extremists that are Buddhists, believe it or not. And so we have to understand that there is such a thing as bad religion or bad manifestations of religion. But I would just point out to you that I've always been impressed by the words of the great British writer and mystery writer G.K. Chesterton, who said that when he was talking about fraudulent accounts of miracles, he said, disprove the existence of genuine miracles no more than counterfeit banknotes disprove the existence of the Bank of England. Every development practitioner in this room today is well aware that all development programs have not been good. Some have been counterproductive. Some have even been corrupt. But that doesn't make us conclude that all development programs are ineffective or corrupt. Our task in development work, as in every human endeavor, including religion, is to weed out that which is problematic and dangerous while supporting that which is life-affirming and effective. So the first, barrier to religious freedom can be religion. Bad religion and good religion needs to force it out, and we need to encourage it. A second enemy of religious freedom is the all-powerful secular state. I mentioned that earlier because the all-powerful secular state doesn't want to have any competition, so that's another reason for religious freedom, because it tends to create conditions of limited government. We want the religion to be free so that it can produce the kinds of citizens that are willing to be generous, willing to forgive. And as you know, in conflict areas around the world, once conflict gets going, once polarization gets going, the one thing we find it so hard to do with our enemies, those we disagree with, those who have hurt us, those who have hurt our families, is to forgive them. Religion is the only force capable of requiring people, whether you want to or not, you need to forgive. You need to start again. You want that kind of force to be unleashed in society. You want a society in which people feel obligated to help the poor, obligated to be generous, obligated to control the chaos of their own unbridled selfishness. The great French writer Alexis de Tocqueville noted in the 19th century when looking at America, he said, despotism may govern without religion, but liberty cannot. He said, liberty is not going to survive without the values that religious freedom and religion can create. So I think the evidence is quite striking. There was a book that came out about 10 years ago, 8 years ago actually, by Dr. Nilay Saya, called Weapon of Peace, How Religious Liberty Combats Terrorism. And he gave an enormous amount of empirical evidence of all the social goods that can come in terms of fighting terrorism through religious values, promoting pluralism, promoting civil discussion and debate. All of these things are the enemy of religious and secular extremism. So let me conclude by simply saying this. To promote international religious freedom as a diplomatic and developmental objective is to unleash powerful forces which promote peace and stability, inculcate the values necessary for societies to flourish in all ways, including economically. The promotion of religious freedom is not just a job for faith-based NGOs, although, of course, we cooperate with them and are glad for their support. It is the job of all of us, since we all can see the connection between religious freedom and what it can produce and the success of our own international development programs. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Kent. Lot to think about. So, Kent, I know you would have even more to say about some of the international standards, so let me start with that. One might be skeptical that some governments today would see any obligation to respect religious freedom, but in fact, there are foundations for religious freedom built into international law and agreements. Could you just give a little of the foundation for religious freedom? What's the Declaration for Human Rights say?
Yeah, you know, this is interesting because a lot of folks, there have been some folks who say religious freedom's good, democracy's good, but it's really, it's Western societies. This flows out of their tradition and even out of their religious beliefs in some respects. And it's not global. But in fact, if you study human rights and the emergence of human rights law and religious freedom, et cetera, you will discover that at the very beginning, in 1948, after World War II, it was the diverse cultures of religions of the world, not just Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but other world religions and other societies that passed in 1948, on December the 7th, the UN Declaration of Human Rights, of which Article 18 presents a very eloquent statement of why this is important for the flourishing of human societies. So I think it's really important for us to reject outright that religious freedom is just our toy. It's just our little gift to the world. It's something we're sort of capable of and other people don't want or need. The world has said they want this as well. They want to control their own fates. They want the freedom of conscience to believe and, as Madison put it, act on the basis of what their religious convictions say. So I really do believe the evidence is overwhelming, and there are lots of covenants after this, after the 1948 one, that have come into existence, again, which the world has signed on to as important. We just need to realize this just isn't an American thing.
Right. So we've got international standards, effective standards, and even policies at our own government level for religious freedom. How do we make that real? And David, I'm going to turn to you first. Welcome. Thank you for being here as well. And I want to ask you in the context of a case study. In northern Iraq, as we know, there was a genocide. And the world had to decide how to come together, having faced that problem in other contexts as well. And one might argue we were slow to respond in some ways, and with international assistance, we finally did move forward. I was serving in the first Trump administration, as you know, when the White House was starting to ask USAID, why aren't we doing more here with the Christian, Yazidi, and other religious minority communities that were facing persecution in northern Iraq, and active military aggression as well. We had the opportunity to respond, and in fact did. And you and Kent both were watching that situation closely. I was at USAID serving under Administrator Mark Green, And we were challenged to move quickly in an institution that everybody in this room knows did not have a tradition or practice of moving very quickly. But thankfully, we had been working at Mark Green's direction on the new partnerships initiative. And we had thankfully come to a point of being ready to launch NPI. So these things coincided, and when the White House directive came, we actually were able to issue grants to at least 6 local partners within 6 weeks, which, as Wade will tell you, as Gloria will tell you, is an impossible speed for procurement. But we did it, and some of those partners on the ground were people you were very close to. Could you just paint the picture of this response from a programming standpoint to a religious freedom challenge and a humanitarian challenge?
Happy to do that, Randy, and so good to be with all of you today, and with Kent as well. And this was an important time in U.S. foreign policy and in our strategic response to a genocide that in the modern era has been one of the worst. Atrocity, crimes prevented there on the ground in the Nineveh Plain in northern Iraq, genocide, women, particularly Yazidi women, by the thousands taken into human slavery, into forced marriages. This was truly a horrible, horrible context in a very volatile part of the world, as we know. And it does, maybe to the surprise of all of us, it does constitute what has been the most robust response by the U.S. government in modern history. And so it deserves our analysis. Now, like any response, it had its shortcomings, but it also had some victories and some lessons learned. And I learned many personal lessons. I learned, for one, that religious freedom must be put in real shoe leather. It must be worked out on the ground with local actors. And that when recovery and sustainability and humanitarian assistance are in the conversation of foreign policy, local actors must be involved. And that helps us to think about what model works. And I loved hearing some of the conversation on the previous panel about considering new models and being at a time where we look at new models. In the Nineveh Plain, on one of the trips I was there, I spent 4 days in the small town of Karam, less 30 kilometers outside Erbil, and walked the town with Monsignor Thabit. And 85% of the homes burnt, destroyed. The water mains in the city were burst. There were very few people there in the town. They had vanquished. And I asked Monsignor Thabit, I said, what can I go back to the U.S. consulate? What can I go back to Washington and say that you need to help the church recover, to help your people return? And I expected an answer where I would need to go back and go to Capitol Hill and work on new legislation or new policy or meet with the National Security Council about the need for security. That's what I expected to hear. But what Monsignor Thabit said rattled me. He said, David, all we need are seeds. Seeds. And I said, you have to help me understand that. And he said, 100 families in my church in this town are farmers. They'll repair the water mains. They'll work on their own homes. But they've got to be able to plant the fields, raise the crops, feed their family. Religious freedom became an issue of agriculture, became an issue of food security. And I began to understand that even more clear. Religious freedom is not just an idea in the academic institution or in the ivory towers of the church. It is poverty. It is food. It is water, as Kent said.
Let me just add that it's very interesting. I've seen in third world or non-Western contexts a very interesting alliance which sometimes is created between people from different religious backgrounds and sometimes no religious background, but united around a common mission, alleviating poverty or dealing with trafficking. And this sort of thing where, folks motivated by religion, but also folks just motivated by their own conscience and goodwill, working together not only accomplishes a goal, but it creates what we all understand are the seeds of what will produce civil society. Because it's that pluralism of working together, religions, different religions and non-religious, working together. And then there's a second thing I want to mention. A few years ago, when we founded the Religious Freedom Institute, we did something extremely controversial. It affected our status with some of our donors. We hired a Muslim in an organization that was mainly Christian to work on religious freedom issues with us. And why did we do this? I remember having to get on the phone with some big donors and explain why we would do this. Aren't they extremists? Don't they have all sorts of problems? What is it about their religion that produces so many extremists? And we tried to patiently explain the best thing to do to promote religious freedom among Muslims is for Muslims to explain why it's consistent with their own religious theology. Not a Jew or not a Christian tell a Muslim why they should believe in religious freedom. You need a Muslim to explain why this is consistent with the Quran. Or, there are clearly people who don't agree, but that's the case in all religions. You get difference of opinions. We need to unleash the power of what I would call the positive religious voices to deal with the negative religious voices. And we, as development practitioners, can encourage that in programming by setting up scenarios in which people talk to each other about how together to work. We did this, remember, Gloria, we did this in the Balkans. We did this where we would bring in the Muslims and the Christians, the Orthodox, and they didn't much like each other, but we gave grants to each of them to do help on repairing mosques or synagogues or whatever had been damaged by the other. And they learned to work together, and it was some of the more successful programming we did. But in the midst of all this, you're unleashing values that make it possible for our programs to succeed. Our economic programs cannot succeed in an environment where people have not had the opportunity to understand the joys of generosity or forgiveness or cooperation. And religion can be a powerful incentive to realize the importance of those things.
Before we pull the lens back again to some broader policy questions, one more case study. David, to you, Nigeria. If you were looking for some parallel in terms of the elevated status of a diplomatic issue like Iraq in the period 8 to 10 years ago, it might be Nigeria. Could you paint a picture for us? There's been, I believe there's been a CPC designation by the current administration, which is a country of particular concern for violating religious freedom under the, I should say, the authorities, which are the International Religious Freedom Act, IRF, which was first passed in, I think, 1998. And in 2016, that act was reauthorized. I think every 5 years it's reauthorized, and named after Congressman Frank Wolf, who I know you have both worked closely with over the years. I worked for Congressman Wolf. He was a champion, retired now, champion of religious freedom for decades when it was, including in the days when it was not really a flag carried by any or few members of Congress. And so with those foundations, you've got the CPC designation, you've got enhanced diplomacy and development going forward. You also have the current administration seeing Nigeria as a potential recipient of major global health funding, and, like we heard about in the first panel, a pivot toward the countries themselves deciding the priorities. So you've got a compact in place in Nigeria, and you've got the likelihood of funding that will continue to flow to fight disease burdens, promote maternal child health, et cetera. So a comprehensive approach, but in the middle of this, the challenge of Christian-Muslim cooperation and some opportunities that you're seeing.
Yeah, thanks for setting the stage on that, Randy. And it is interesting because there are parallels that really help us focus on the need, the absolute mandate of working with the religious communities on the ground. And that was true in Iraq, and we did that across the board with Christians, all the historic Christian communities that were there for millennia, the newer evangelical communities, the Muslims, the Yazidis, the Turkmen, the Shabbat. All of these various communities began to work together and come together around a round table and work together. We've seen the need for that in Nigeria. So if you look at Nigeria, such a hot spot right now of intense persecution and extremism and violence. And it's not just focused on Christians. I mean, they are the brunt of a significant part of the attacks, but also on Muslims. Both are being killed by the thousands, and in many instances, the officials in leadership there are complicit with the criminal activity and the violence in that country. It's a very complex problem. And who's at the root of that? Is that the Islamic State, West Africa province? Is that the Boko Haram? Is that the Fulani herdsmen? It's probably all of them combined. But the religious communities that are the brunt of the attack and the violence are finding no help from the officials. And that's one reason the CPC designation was levied upon them. But what's needed, and we hosted some of the religious leaders here back in February. Christians, Muslims came together here in Washington, sitting at the same table, saying, we want to work together. Can you help us find solutions? And so we need to look for models that will help build a bridge to some authorities that they can work with in their own country, which we're trying to do through the judiciary. We need to also look at models of actually taking assistance to those communities on the ground, which happened in Iraq, direct USG assistance going to faith-based NGOs and communities for the first time. That was the new partnership initiative that Randy talked about, created at USAID. It was authorized during those years by H.R. 390, the Iraq and Syria Genocide Relief and Accountability Act, authorized by statute and law to send assistance directly to faith-based communities. And if you want development to work and you want recovery and humanitarian assistance to work, you've got to find a way to bring in the local actors and get them directly involved. It was a new model. Unfortunately, today, that new model has been set aside. It's been backburnered. And I'm calling and would ask all of you to call for that to be brought forward. It worked. It was a good model. And to go to local actors and take direct assistance that have technical assistance and, yes, capacity to do it. They can do it, and they can do it in Nigeria as well.
Thank you, David. Kent, anything you'd like to add, and especially if we pull the camera lens back to the broader policy priorities. So in the first Trump administration, we had a very robust set of policies to address religious freedom. There was the establishment of ministerial meetings. Were they annual, David? And periodic sub-ministerial meetings where ministers with the religious freedom responsibility for governments all over the world were coming together periodically to set common policy agendas. This was promoted by Ambassador Sam Brownback, the global ambassador for international religious freedom, who used his convening power to do that and to do other things. And then you had the programming that both of you talked about, robust programming as well. So all these elements, let me turn first to you, Kent. We've got those foundations and building blocks, and David talked about the practical ways programs have made a difference. Anything to add in terms of a vision for future policies and programs around religious freedom?
Well, I think one thing is the orientation we give ambassadors or State Department Foreign Service officers related to the role of religion. We have to work harder on this because so many of our diplomats come from an environment where they themselves no longer consider themselves religious, and actually the polls would all indicate they're even rather skeptical that religion has much to offer. It might just be a problem. Well, an orientation that can change that, even for a person who does not consider themselves religious, is simply an orientation which talks about the sociological and empirical data which make a connection between what I would call positive religion and the societal goods that they are there in that country to support, as they also support American best interests. It changes your perspective a lot if you understand that religion can be a positive force to advance your own agenda. If your agenda that is the human flourishing and peace. If you're trying to dispel a civil unrest or conflict, I remember doing this in Crete in I guess there where we would sit down with the ambassador, and you had Muslims and Christians together, both with a long list of aggravations and hostilities to each other, but to talk together about what in their own religion requires of them to find a way to see the human dignity in the other. Well, that kind of conversation can only occur if you take seriously and suggest to them that they take seriously the roots of their own religion and where they might fall short, where they might not. But I just think the empirical data is pretty convincing that this is our founders got it right. They weren't trying to have a state church in America. In fact, they were absolutely opposed to that. But they wanted a free society where religion could contribute to society, and that's what all the founders said was absolutely necessary. I left out of my speech the final words in 1796 when George Washington gave his farewell address, in which he said the one disposition that would be most important, at least I think I left this out, for a prosperous society would be unleashing the power of religious good and values. And that was a strong reminder that anything that interferes with that is going to interfere with the well-being of society.
I really appreciate the confluence of...
So we're at time. Can we just wrap up?
Yeah.
Just get 30 seconds from each of the panelists. Thank you very much. And then please let's continue the conversation in the hallway after.
Thanks, Mike. I just want to ask first David and then Kent. David, anything to add in terms of the broader policy issues and the building a new model, briefly? And then Kent, I'm going to turn to you for one closing thought on how you would challenge the development practitioners in this room to consider your admonitions today, your encouragement today.
Sure, I'm not going to stand between you and lunch. So just simply to say this and wrap up, religious freedom is a capacious human right. That means it strengthens other human rights that we're all concerned about in every society around the world, and it contributes to a host of societal goods that benefits communities of faith and people of no faith at all. It truly, truly nourishes the common good. And so let's look at programs that reach to communities of faith, like the New Partnership Initiative. Let's revive that. Let's work with people that are making a difference on the ground through these communities of faith.
One word, amen. I completely like that, and I think that's the right way. That's the right note to end on.
Really appreciate both of you and Kent, especially the confluence of quoting some of the American founders and their perspective and how it applies to the importance of religious freedom in international development and in the world today. Let's thank our two panelists.
Thank you, Kent, David, and Randy. That was really terrific, and I learned a lot. For all of you here in the room, we have a break now, and the exhibit hall is open down near where you registered earlier this morning. And then it's a short break. At 12 o'clock, our breakout sessions are set to begin, and they are in the rooms, two of them directly to the right of us and one directly to the left. So all clustered in here. We have a session on AI for development, the view from Asia, and energy security and resource deal making for you to choose from. And then after those end, at 1 o'clock, we'll have lunch back in this room, and we'll have a keynote address by Alexis Bonnell from OpenAI. And then we have several plenaries this afternoon, so I hope you all plan to stay for those. We have a conversation with Tom Hardy from the USTDA after lunch, and Dan Petrie from the MCC together. Then we have a panel on trade, investment, and development, and those are both those sessions are in this room. Then we'll have another short break before the exhibit hall closes, and we're closing today with a fireside chat with Jeff Graham, the State Department's senior bureau official for the Bureau of Global Health, Security, and Diplomacy. And we'll end our day with that, and a reception to follow just outside this room. So we have a lot more good stuff coming, and I hope you all plan to stay. So I'll see you back in here at 1. So thank you.